Hello and good evening. I'm Natania Jameson, Director of Programs at St. Louis House and co-chair of the Racial Equity Work Group. I'm very excited that you're here joining us tonight to learn about the Austin Prioritization Index, or API, as you will hear it commonly referred to this evening. The API has been a work in progress for several years here in Austin, and we're really excited to get to go and dive deep to get to inform you guys about it this evening. The API has been a necessary tool for us to be able to help our Austin neighbors, to be able to have barriers removed and make housing that is equitable for all that need it is something that we all strive for, and this tool will help us get there. So welcome. And now we're going to hear from a few of our supporters.
I just want to say a great big thank you.
Thank you and congratulations.
Kudos and thank you to the Equity Task Group on all the work associated with the Austin Prioritization Index.
I am so proud of and thankful for the folks in our homelessness response system that have brought forward the API.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution to homelessness, and that is why the Austin Prioritization Index is such a vital new tool in our toolbox.
You know, it is critical that our homelessness response system work toward racial and gender equity.
In this moment where we're bringing unprecedented resources to housing and serving those people experiencing homelessness in our community, that makes it even more important for us to have a tool like this.
What an awesome tool that'll be representative of our community here in Austin as we work to fight to end homelessness here.
After all, homelessness, as we all know, is a racial issue at its core. It is a particularly cruel result of years and generations of displacement and disinvestment and despair.
I really appreciate those who have pushed us in local government to finally make the investments that we needed to make years ago. And now with this tool, we can make it in the most effective and equitable way.
The work you all have done will have reverberations for generations to come.
It's innovation, it's equity, it's one big step towards ending homelessness in our community.
I'm so proud to work alongside you to end homelessness in our community.
Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you to everyone on that video. We really appreciate their support and all the work that we've done. It's been a labor of very intense work for the last 2 years. And my partner in that labor of work for the last 2 years has been Miss Kiana Fisher. It's been my pleasure to work with her as a colleague, as a friend, and in doing this work, and as my co-chair of the Equity Work Group. So everyone, please welcome Kiana Fisher.
Thank you so much, Natania. I'm going to talk briefly about the homelessness response system, but before I do, I want to tell you a little bit about me. Chris, next slide. My name is Kiana Fisher. I am a mother, a wife, a daughter, a sister, and an aunt. I am a community organizer and an agent of change. I grew up right here in Austin and have worked in homeless services for 8 years. I recently joined the ECHO team and am so proud to serve as co-chair of the Equity Committee of the Austin Travis County Homelessness Response System. Next slide. The homelessness response system is all of us, organizations, community stakeholders, people with lived experience of homelessness working together to solution find to end homelessness in our community. ECHO's role is to provide a framework and to support community collaboration, to promote data-informed programming and community standards that center those that are unhoused. Next slide. You have probably heard a lot about the coordinated assessment. The coordinated assessment is a tool used to assess the level of support that a person or family needs to regain housing stability. Why do we even need a coordinated assessment? The answer is simply because there's not enough resources to support everyone's journey back to stable housing. The API that will be discussed here tonight allows our community to work towards the most equitable distribution of the resources coming into our system. Next slide. Most people take the coordinated assessment at a front with a front door provider, a street outreach worker, at a navigation center, or with an emergency shelter worker. I want to take this moment to share that if you or anyone that you know or love has taken the coordinated assessment, it is super important that anytime your contact information changes, that you update your information, your coordinated assessment information, so that service providers can contact you when you're referred for services. Next slide. The new Leadership Council was seated early summer 2021. This decision-making body is more representative of the population that we serve, including 3 appointed seats for people with lived experience and appointed seats specifically for equity advocates. The Leadership Council is charged with setting policies and procedures, operations, and written standards for the homelessness response system. And before I pass it on to one of my esteemed colleagues, I want to ask that if you're interested in serving as a voting member of any of our committees and work groups, we will post the link in the chat so that you can be a part of our system. I want to pass it to Ms. Summer Wright to talk specifically about the work of the API.
Thank you so much, Kiana. Hi, everyone. I'm Summer. I serve on the aforementioned Leadership Council of our homeless response system in Austin. I have also been a longstanding, though not as longstanding as Natanya or Kiana, member of the Equity Committee. And I am here to get into the weeds of what's different about the Austin Prioritization Index, how we came to those, the process of making it, and all that fun stuff. So yeah. Next slide. So prior to the API, we still had a coordinated assessment. We were using something that many communities around the country use called the VI SPDAT, which if I didn't have this slide in front of me, I wouldn't even know what it stood for. The Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Decision Assistance Tool. It was created in about 2010 as a way of using data in order to prioritize people. The issue is that it is based on data that is not local, that isn't universally applicable. They got their data from a small and not necessarily representative sample of clients, of people living on the street, largely older white folks, which means that essentially studies that have been done into its equitability and effectiveness have shown mixed results, as it says here. Next slide. And so that brings us to the Austin Prioritization Index. We knew that the VI SPDAT wasn't working for our community. We knew, service providers knew that it wasn't an effective way of linking the most vulnerable people with the services that they needed. And so we thought, okay, so let's build one for our community, for us, by us. And we need to look at the equity first, because that is the major failing of the VI SPDAT. So The Equity Task Group, as Natania said, over the course of years, began working on this. And in August, it was brought to the Leadership Council and was approved. And this says will be effective, but it has been effective for use in coordinated entry since October 1st. Next slide. Right, and so the Austin Prioritization Index contains a subset of questions from the VI SPDAT, because it was not our goal to throw the baby out with the bathwater or cut off our nose to spite our face. We looked at the questions on the VI SPDAT and looked at what was working and what wasn't working. And what was working, we kept. No reason to get rid of it. Testing it against our own community with our own data. Some of it was effective, though not all of it. It also includes questions that were developed by and piloted in our community, developed by the tools work group under the Equity Task Group, by people doing the work, by people doing the coordinated assessments, and by people who had taken coordinated assessments. So yeah, next slide. And so the questions in the Austin Prioritization Index fall into three broad categories. Looking at health conditions, looking at history of homelessness, and looking at general barriers to housing. And you can see the breakdown of where those questions are here. Next slide. Yeah, and so when we look at breaking these down into questions, before I get into this, the really big sort of caveat that I want to say, and that I've stressed and I'd like to continue to stress, is that this is a tool developed for and by Austin. It is not our goal to make a VI SPDAT 2. We are not looking for other communities to take these questions and just use them out of the box. Our goal, we would like to see, this sort of work done in more places, but it's about the process of developing data based on your community. The things that we found may not be applicable to other cities or other rural communities that are dealing with homelessness. So when the questions that we're looking at, asking around age, if there are children in the household, meaning with them experiencing homelessness, whether clients are pregnant or breastfeeding, their ability to access healthcare, if they have HIV or AIDS, if they have high blood pressure and end-stage disease, challenges in meeting their daily needs, if they struggle with their mental health or substance use. Then we look at how frequently they've experienced unsheltered homelessness or the length of current homelessness. This is looking at chronic homelessness because there are two separate ways of measuring it. One being experiencing uninterrupted homelessness for a year, and the other being experiencing it 4 times in the last 3 years, I believe. And then whether or not people have experienced essentially violence or the threat of violence during their time homeless. Then we look at the barriers to housing, education, history of foster care, history of being in the juvenile justice system, criminal records. We look at whether people were born and raised here, where they were born and raised here, and whether or not they were raised in a multi-generational household. Next slide. And so what we did was we looked at the responses to these questions up to March of 2021. And this includes all coordinated assessment types for individuals, adult individuals, for families, and for youth, excuse me. And depending on when these questions arose, obviously the sample sizes are different. So the questions that we borrowed from the VI SPDAT, looking at, this is how many people have been asked these questions. And that's starting back in October of 2016. The newly adopted questions, as you can see, is less than the ones that were on the VI SPDAT. But I don't want that to sound like they're less statistically significant. Then we do have pilot questions, because one of the things that we know about this is that this is a fluid process, that this is ongoing. We know that we don't have the perfect thing right out of the gate. And we know that we want to make improvements as our knowledge grows. And so the questions that are in pilot are, that when they started has changed, but depending on when we came up with them, essentially. Next slide. Right, so we perform statistical tests, chi-square analyses, and I'm just going to say right after saying that, I don't know how to perform a chi-square analysis personally. I don't even really know what that is. All I know is that it is a test that was done by people who do know what it is and how to do it, in order to test the strength, the chance that there is a meaningful correlation between the demographics we were looking at and the answers to the questions we were asking. And so when we're looking at, what were we testing for with these questions, we're looking at race and gender as stated, and race can be specifically Black clients, specifically Latinx clients, or any non-white clients. And with gender, we were specifically looking at transgender people experiencing homelessness, including non-binary and gender non-conforming people. Next slide. Right, and so when you look at these questions, the breakdown of which questions are geared towards racial equity, it's all of these. So I just want to have a quick aside. I think I meant to say it earlier, but one of the important things about this was it was not only made by people in Austin, but it was made by people who represented, had a stronger representation of the people who experience homelessness in Austin. The Equity Committee had Black representation, it had trans representation, it had representation from people who had experienced homelessness. And so when you look at these questions, just to call her out because she's not here and I can. So for instance, the question about being raised in a multi-generational household, that came from another person on the Equity Committee, Ree Azam Morris, who also experienced homelessness in Austin as a person of color, and knew from her personal experience of being raised in a multi-generational household that that was something we should be asking about. And so one of the reasons that we were able to come to this was by having the expertise of the right people in the room. Next slide. Yeah, and so here we have the questions that support gender equity. I think I should state here that of these questions, none or almost none of them are actively harmful to the idea of racial or gender equity. We know, yeah, essentially we were looking at, this is just highlighting the questions that support gender equity. The previous slide was looking at questions that supported racial equity, but there aren't questions in here that are active barriers to that, I guess is what I'll say. Yeah, next slide. And so based on the available data we have for the API, our Black and Hispanic Latinx clients will now score consistently higher than white non-Hispanic clients, which is a stark contrast. Previously under the VI SPDAT, Black clients were scoring almost a full point less on average than white clients, which is just absolutely not representative of the vulnerability that people of color face on the street, which is, why we knew we had to do this. And so this is, as it says on the slide, adopting this is a huge step in the right direction. I will say I'm not going to show a graph here regarding the gender equity, just because when we look at the sample size of trans people who experience homelessness in Austin, it's much smaller. And while our results are really overwhelming regarding the successes of this, it would not be, I don't know the right phrasing because I'm not really a data person. I can read a graph, but I can't make one. But essentially, we wouldn't want to overhype it, though we know that there is a strong correlation with the gender equity that we are also promoting. Next slide. And so, yeah, as I said, this is only version 1. The API is going to be subject to constant improvements. The equity committee is still running. They're still on this. And the leadership council is still hungry to improve Austin's homeless response system. We have more questions getting ready to be talked over and piloted. And so it's exciting. This is not the final step. This is just a very big and very strong first step. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Susan McDowell. As I stated when we were talking, when I was talking about the makeup of the room in the equity committee, I was a trans person who experienced homelessness, and it was LifeWorks that got me housed. Susan McDowell has decades of experience as the CEO of this organization. And without her, I would not be here speaking to you all today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And turnabout is fair play, as you said, since I can do it. I wouldn't be here today without your work, Summer, because, the leadership that you have brought to this movement, and I have never been more proud and pleased to say, I was not in the decision-making room in this work. This was the decision-making room prioritized lived experience and representation, and is, for me, who has been around a while, it is a pleasure. It is a pleasure to see the work move in this direction and the decisions move in this direction. So I want to thank you for making it possible for me to be here tonight to get to kind of be the voice of the provider community and what this means for us. And I want to just begin by thanking everybody on the Equity Task Force, everybody on the Leadership Council for kind of bravely and boldly moving in this direction. I can tell you, because some of us interact with our peer cities across the country, and we are a city. We are not a perfect city. We are not a perfect system. We have a lot of work we need to do, but we are a system and a city that is brave enough and strong enough with each other to recognize what's not working, to make the change, to be to try to be really thoughtful about how we make the change and whose voices get heard, and to build, part of the success here is the tool that will center equity. What is the greater success, I think, is the process we have developed that centers equity and how we look at iterating and reiterating the tool based on what we learn in our shared commitment to equity. So I want to step back just a moment and talk about the service provider community, because I don't know who all is on this event, but if you are not aware, there are a large number of service providers in this community. Some are new, some have been around a while. We represent services, a wide array of services, from transitional living to street outreach to shelter to rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing. We represent commitments to specific populations with different experiences of homelessness: youth homelessness, chronic homelessness, family homelessness, domestic violence, and sexual violence. So there's a wide diversity of experience and service and specific population commitment. And it wasn't that long ago that we were operating as a whole lot of kind of solo operators in silos, all doing good jobs housing individuals who were striving to be rehoused. However, if any of us turn around and ask ourselves, are we solving homelessness? Are we working together? We would have been hard pressed to admit that we were collaborating and working as deeply as we need to, and centering the voices of people who have lived the trauma of homelessness. So, even though we do different things, we share this common goal of ending homelessness. But it became very apparent to us, again, not that many years ago. When we talk about coordinated entry, let's not think it went back 20 years. Just really a handful of years that we as a community adopted coordinated entry and the VIS FDAT. And if you work with youth, there's an offshoot of that, so it gets even more complicated. And that was an important step for us to begin to really operate not as siloed agencies, but as a true coordinated system, or we were on our way to a true coordinated system. Always have work to do there. So this was a huge step, and we, in many ways, led different parts of the country in having a system. Thanks to ECHO, that was well supported, that was coordinated, that provided a lot of support for providers to reach the people we wanted to reach. And at the same time, we all kind of knew that something wasn't quite right? And anytime you do a standardized assessment, it is not going to be a perfect fit for everybody. And it would have been easy for us as a community to say, well, we're just going to continue with this system because, we know it's just not quite right, but hey, it's the best we've got. Instead, we had a lot of very brave, committed individuals, a lot of service providers, a lot of folks with our homelessness response system, advocates with lived experience, who really said, now let's really look at the data behind this system, and learned that we had, in fact, this imperfect system was perpetuating some very serious inequities around gender and race. And again, a community not afraid to kind of dive in and begin to really figure out what that meant, how we could change. So what this means for providers is, who we always just kind of felt, we don't think we are prioritizing the individuals and the families who need housing the most. For those of us who are on the service end of this partnership to end homelessness, now we have so much greater confidence that the tool that we are asking the clients who come to us, trusting us to help in their journeys, they will have a tool that more accurately centers their experience and centers equity in their experience, and that the people who need housing the most will be prioritized. We also have confidence that we have a strong community system that is going to continue to learn from what we have in place, and that is the highest and best and most that we can ask for. So, you tell a service provider, hey, here's an assessment we have to use. You're going to get mixed reactions. So to have the confidence that as a community, again, we have the bravery to change and to center lived experience and race and gender in this tool is a tremendous tool in the work. Now, I'm going to say though what it is not. It is absolutely a step in the right direction for equity, and I'm going to, along with all of my colleagues on this call and more broadly in the community, we are going to continue to challenge ourselves as a system to look at every part of the system and ask ourselves, how do we continue this work of centering equity, looking not just at how we are assessing people, but who gets housed and how do they do in this housing? What kind of job are we doing supporting people? So there's still a lot of work to do. And then the final thing I will say that is a community challenge to everybody who is participating in this call is this tool, the API, moves us forward in equity. It will move us forward in making sure people who need housing the most will get it. But what it will not do is it will not increase the available affordable housing stock in Austin. That is still a community challenge that we all need to participate in solving if we are going to end all homelessness. I represent youth homelessness, so it slips out sometimes. All homelessness in our community. So, we are doing amazing work. The task force, the leadership council has just focused so effectively on this and will continue to. And the rest of us also need to work on increasing the housing that's available. So everybody who needs housing will receive it. So I want to end just again by thanking everybody who worked so hard on this tool. And I want to move now to introducing, I think we've got a video with Brian Oakes, who is the co-chair of the Leadership Council that you've heard a lot about of our homelessness response system. So I'm going to hand it over to Brian by video to talk about how we can get involved.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Oakes, chair of the Austin Travis County Homelessness Response System Leadership Council, and also Chief Equity Officer for the City of Austin. I'm extending an invitation for you to join us in the movement to transform our homelessness response system by serving on a committee for the Leadership Council. We've put in a lot of hard work to restructure our Leadership Council and governance model to create a community-based engagement and participation that centers the voices of people with lived experience of homelessness and equity advocates from the community. Our goal is to foster a spirit of collaboration with directly impacted members of the community and diverse service providers across our continuum of care. We're trying to make sure that the values we set for ourselves really match the reality for us as a leadership council. People with personal lived experience of homelessness and equity advocates representing marginalized communities who are not otherwise paid to be on the committee and our work group will be compensated at a rate of $40 an hour starting early next year. Additionally, technology will be made available to anyone who needs it to be able to participate in this process. I want to encourage you to visit the ECHO website to learn more about the committee structure and the opportunities to serve. The expression of interest form must be submitted by Sunday, October the 17th, so time is running out, but I encourage you to contact the ECHO team. They're ready to help answer any questions you may have about applying and hoping to see you serve on the committee.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Brian. And actually, we do have some good news coming out of that. The deadline to get those interest forms in for those committees has been extended another week. So you've got until October 24th now to get those those applications in. So you can see on your screen there, we've got a link. It's just bit.ly/HRS apply. Again, that's bit.ly/HRS apply. And there is that link in the Facebook live event as well within the comments if you want to go and check it out there and express your interest for that. And I am going to go ahead and stop sharing now. And I'll go ahead and turn my camera on so you can see who I am as well. My name is Chris, by the way. I'm the communications manager here at ECHO. And so the next piece of this is going to be really sort of facilitating the Q&A portion with our panel here. So if you do have any questions, please drop them in that Facebook chat and we will do our best to answer them for y'all, whether it's about the API, whether it's about equity more generally within the homelessness response system, whatever you're curious about, drop it in the chat if you're watching with us live here, and we will do our best to answer that for you. But I want to go ahead and start with a couple of questions that I think will help us sort of get into this discussion a little bit. And these questions are for anybody, so please feel free to jump on in. And this has been sort of touched on a little bit throughout the various presentations that we've seen tonight, but I want to frame this this way. So the API is really making an impact in other communities around the country as well as here in Austin. There's really a lot of attention right now on what's happening in Austin and Travis County around the API, around equity within the homelessness response system. So I just want to open this up to all of you. What is it that Austin is doing differently that's bringing this kind of attention from other communities?
If I may get us started, and then I will pass the mic to my colleagues. I think that one of the things that that is really powerful about our system right now is twofold. The first is that there is an unprecedented desire to have the right people in the decision-making spaces, building the table of change together. And then I think and doing so as colleagues, as equals, not reverting back to kind of our silos or our titles or the organizations that we work or don't work for, but really coming together as people that have various lenses of this work and of our system, and recognizing that all of our lenses have to be incorporated, centering race, ensuring that people with lived expertise are empowered enough to speak truth to our system, and then allowing kind of the creative tension to happen. The other thing that I want to make sure that I say in this space is that Austin doesn't have it all figured out. Austin as a city doesn't have it all figured out. The homelessness response system around equity issues doesn't have it all figured out. But I think that what we do have is a commitment to continue to work through these issues. We are leaning forward into the discomfort that happens when you challenge white dominant culture in your system. And so I think that is what is kind of pushing us. And the success of the API doesn't hurt either. But we don't have it all figured out, and we're going to continue to move forward anyway.
If I may jump in really quickly, I would like to say, piggybacking on what Kiana has mentioned, a couple of things that we are doing here in Austin is that we are targeting all aspects of homelessness. You know, we're starting with the youth, we're starting with veterans, we're starting with everyday individuals, we have children and families. So I do feel that we have a lot of different things that are working together successfully towards working on ending that disparity that we see here in Austin. Yes, we're not perfect whatsoever, but can we imagine if there wasn't a youth program, Summer would have never gotten the help that she needed, you know, and or others in our community. So the fact that we do have not necessarily silos, but just different targeted specialties that organizations in this city focus on, and we all can spread our resources around, and we're all not working on one specific aspect of homelessness. That's what I feel that we do have a little bit of a leg above everyone else. And this API, part one, is definitely going to take us into the future and put that step forward and having these uncomfortable conversations that need to be had in this city and in every other city regarding homelessness and how to end it.
The one thing that I will say, I think Kiana and Natanya, crushed it in their responses, but to provide some nuance to what Natanya was saying, I was fortunate to receive services from LifeWorks as a person under 25. But also, as people have touched on, Austin is not perfect. As a trans client, there were no queer-specific, queer-friendly resources in our city. And so when we look at equity, this is a big step, and it's not the only step. We still need to look at equitable geographic distribution of housing opportunities. We would do a disservice to say that we can look only at equity in housing people rather than also looking at how do we prevent people from becoming unhoused in the first place. There are so many more things that we can look at, just to sort of go on a tangent there. But other than that, yeah, I really agree with everything they said.
The only thing I'll add to that, and again, this is partially from my long experience in Austin and partially working with colleagues in other cities, is that Austin not being perfect, what's also not perfect right now, period, is just the polarization of any difficult discussion, right? In Austin and in elsewhere. And I think that this community and this amazingly special group of highly diverse people can come together and, as Kiana said, lean forward into the difficult conversation that says, here's what we're doing that's not okay, and move to not just naming it, but understanding it, and then developing a solution that will ultimately be imperfect, because all solutions are imperfect, but to then be able to just kind of build our muscle together to learn and grow and change in a world that frankly is not necessarily conducive to that kind of discomfort and collaboration. I think sets us apart as a community, because I see a lot of other communities who just really spin on this conversation, not able to come to the common ground of inclusion and action in the way that this process certainly has, and that I hope we will carry forward, again, as we're all saying, to looking at other aspects of the system and the systems that influence our system.
Thank you all for that perspective. And sort of going off of that, that one of the themes of constant improvement when we're talking about the API and piloting new questions, we got this question in from our Facebook Live chat that I want to ask again, just open to anyone. What strategies are being discussed around ensuring a trauma-informed approach as new questions are being piloted and established? Are there concerns or challenges we are focusing on around people having to update their information, which may be a trigger for having to retell their stories and justify their needs for services? Thinking especially for our unhoused community members experiencing complex trauma and impacted by ongoing racism and discrimination. What can providers do to support our unhoused community members we work with?
Yeah, so I'll sort of be the first to step in for this one. As someone who has taken the coordinated assessment. So there are some things that we've done. But the first thing I want to say before I discuss any of that is that this is subjective. As someone who took the coordinated assessment and who grew up involved with systems, by the time I took my coordinated assessment, I was really used to having to rattle off every bad thing that had ever happened to me to some person with a clipboard. It was not, for me, a new difficult experience. For someone who is experiencing homelessness for the first time, it could be. And to compound that trauma, the fact that so many assessors are white, haven't experienced homelessness, don't know what it is to be the person that they're talking to. And the equity in who is providing, that is a big thing with that too. But beyond that, this was a question that we asked as we explored what are the most trauma-informed ways we can word questions, which questions take it a step too far, and we sort of need to figure out another way of getting the information that can help prioritize the most vulnerable people for housing without harming them. And also, this is a big one. This is good for service providers too, but it's also shorter. And that's a big deal. Because I will say that no matter how much we sort of look at, is this going to be harmful for someone? There is going to be people out there. There are going to be people out there who take this assessment, and it's hard. When we're looking to prioritize the most vulnerable people, we need to ask questions that have to do with vulnerability. And that is going to include experiences of illness and violence and poverty. And that's not easy. But making it shorter and other steps that are not currently part of the API itself, but that can be done surrounding it, can also be pretty big deals. Being able to meet people where they are instead of making people travel halfway across the city on Austin's abysmal public transportation. There's so many things we could be doing. With wording, all I can say is it's something we looked for. It's not something we're going to do perfectly, but it's something that we're trying for.
Summer, I really appreciate your answer to this question. I think that one of the things that really was transformational about our process was that we had in the room people that had taken the coordinated assessment. And so as we're developing this replacement tool, as we're piloting questions, we have that lens in the room to talk about the trauma response to the questions, to make that, to center that experience. And like Summer said, this is an assessment like several other assessments in kind of the social service systems that does ask really challenging questions. I think that we as a homelessness response system have a responsibility to ensure that not only community assessors, but all people working in our homelessness response system are trained in trauma-informed care, are provided opportunities for racial equity training, for gender equity training, and our system, we have to invest in that. There are things that we're doing right now to invest in those skill sets. And there's a need for continued investment and to continue to challenge service providers, community assessors, system leaders, to ensure that we continue to center that trauma-informed lens.
Well, thank you both. One other question that we got into our Facebook chat to again pose to the whole group here. And I'm gonna paraphrase the question a little bit here. From what I'm sort of understanding, this person is asking is, as we see some of the financial implications of the pandemic that we're in, and as we see rents in Austin ballooning, and more people unable to afford living here, we continue to be at risk of seeing a lot of new people experiencing homelessness. And so the question is how can the API be responsive to changing needs as the population of people experiencing homelessness changes? And we've touched on this a little bit in terms of piloting new questions, but I wonder if y'all can walk through a little bit of kind of how responsive a tool like this can be.
I'll take a stab at it first. So this current version of the API won't be able to currently solve this current issue that we're about to have. It's going to happen, right? But we're going to have to do the research and do the data and see where we are in 3 to 6 months with the eviction moratoriums happening and the rent increasing. Unfortunately, we can't do anything without the data. So that'll be the first step for us to collect that. It's not going to be an ideal situation for us here in Austin whatsoever. But then we also have other pieces, for example, of diversion and other pieces in the community where we're going to have to reach into those resources and network with our neighbors and our partners and our other agencies here in Austin to be able to tap into that, to be able to minimize, hopefully, what we are going to see. Again, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be ideal in any way, shape, or form, but we won't be able to do the, API 1.2 or 3 or 2.0 until we have a good amount of data to be able to make those adjustments to the scale, to that scoring tool, to be able to make amends for that. So we're going to have to tap into our other resources. Diversion is going to get hit pretty hard, and trying to help those neighbors in that situation move forward and stabilize as quickly as possible.
Tanya, the only thing I would add to that is just the fact that we are walking into that with this tool helps us, because we are walking into a situation that's going to be very daunting. It's going to be very destabilizing, but at least we're walking into it with a tool that we know centers the experience of persons and families of color and transgendered more than if we were with the old tool. So what we learn in 6 months is going to be better, and how we are serving 6 months from now is going to be better, even though we're faced with a challenge that we don't yet understand. And to your point, we are going to have to rely heavily and think around how, as a community, we can, be flexible in prioritizing resources for prevention and diversion.
All right, we just got a couple minutes left here in the discussion. So I want to wrap looking forward a little bit here. Again, it's something that has been brought up, but I really want to focus on this, that we know the API is a step and not the only step toward really building equity within the homelessness response system. So where else do we really need to focus our attention as a community?
Yeah.
I already said creating more housing, right?
I was like, who's gonna go first?
That's it.
Yeah. I just want to say, like, when we look at equitable solutions, housing everyone would be a really equitable solution. When 8% of Austin is Black and 36% of homeless Austinites are Black, and we have that 5 times more likely than white people to end up homeless. If we house everyone, we're housing Black people 5 times more than, in direct response. But in order to do that, as I also touched on earlier, needing to diversify where we're housing people, not just saying we need to house more people and creating ghettos. Geographical equity is just a very personal passion for me. But I also think, as I stated, the need for prevention and diversion services. I think we've all mentioned that at some point today. And yeah, this also, as mentioned earlier, this doesn't change who's providing the coordinated assessment. It doesn't change where is providing the coordinated assessment. It doesn't change the physical ability of people to access one. The presence of non-scheduled in advance assessments, which can be very difficult for the most vulnerable people to access on the street. So there's a lot. And I don't believe in being shy about that. And I also don't think that should overshadow that we can't do any of that. We can't open equitable housing locations without making sure that the people we're putting in them are equitable. This is the first step in a hopefully long line of strong steps towards a more equitable Austin.
So with that last bit of information, I'll just put in my 2 cents before I wrap this up for the evening. The final thing that we also think about is the flexibility and the barriers to housing that people have as far as criminal backgrounds. We have to have the flexibility in the housing piece in order to house folks. We can't continue to judge our neighbors and our fellow Austinites by mistakes that have happened that were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago and try to put them in housing. Or preventing them from getting housing, which is the biggest hurdle that we have, the barriers to housing. If we want to make housing accessible and equitable to everyone, we have to literally be more flexible with those barriers, and as well as create more housing and diversifying it like Summer talked about. But we can go on this for hours and keep talking, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I would like to thank everyone on the panel tonight, Kiana, Summer, Susan, Chris, thank you so much. And everyone behind the scenes for all of the work and putting all of this together, as well as all of our partners in the community, all of our cheerleaders that are out there, everyone out here doing this work to end homelessness in Austin. I thank you. We all thank you. If you have any more questions, please feel free to check out the ECHO's website at austinecho.org/API or austinecho.org to be able to just research and find more information regarding any of the resources that we talked about here this evening, as well as to follow up and see the live recording of this presentation. And let's work together in continuing to do this amazing work, and it's much needed work in our community. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good evening.